everybody. So, we're here with Dr. Devorah Siegel, who is a pediatric neurologist at NYU Langone, and with Dr. Rona Waltenberg, who's an associate dean for admissions at Zucker School of Medicine, Hofstra Northwell, um, professor of radiology. If you could see it on the screen, and if we could um, start our presentation.
All right. Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to provide a little bit of a backdrop to discussion, just some overall interview concepts. And then please feel free. I know there's ability to put questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll have a significant amount of time for discussion. Okay, so a little bit of a backdrop here, and this is who I am. Okay, now we just have to get this going forward and we're good. Everybody can see the screen, right? Yeah, correct? Somebody say yes.
Yes.
All right, so we have learning objectives at Zucker. We're all about the learning objectives. So we're going to discuss the importance of the interview in the medical school application process. As many of you know, law schools, business schools, no interview, but med school, we have the interview, and it is important, obviously, when you're patient facing, your ability to communicate effectively is extraordinarily important. We're going to look a little bit at the different types of interviews that are available that you will see at the different schools. We're going to discuss the MMI, which we use, the multiple mini interview, and a little bit more of a detailed explanation of that. And we're going to discuss a little bit about how COVID-19 has changed the approach of interviewing in the medical school process, and I think as well as in the residency process, and hopefully Dr. Siegel will share a little bit more about that as well. So if you look here at the data that's put out by the AAMC, you can see that the number of applicants to medical school was hovering in the 50,000+, and then the COVID spike here in 21, 22, where there was a lack of gap year opportunities. So a lot of students ended up just going in and going straight in because they figured, why not? I can't get my, my clinical research going, and I can't do my patient facing activities, so might as well apply. And now it's some sort of comeback, as you can see in the 23-24 cycle, which is not the one that just completed now, but the one prior, to a little bit more normal numbers. And with ours, we saw sort of the same. The national numbers dropped off a little bit to about, somewhere around 50,000, and ours decreased again, the same, again, the COVID peak, and it sort of has normalized a little bit again to the pre-COVID numbers. Now, the interesting piece is if you look at this, and you can see that this is sort of a grid of GPA and MCAT, and you can see that in students or applicants that have GPAs that are in the highest, greater than 3.79, and that's the top bar, and an MCAT that's greater than 517, which is about the 95th percentile or plus. If you look, only 82% of those actually get in, right? So what's the reason why? It's the interview, right? So we're not metric driven necessarily. The interview is exceptionally important. And you can see that 17% of applicants that have really big numbers, big GPA, big MCAT, don't get into medical school. And 17% is not a small number by any means. So I think it highlights, when you look at just the data here, how that interview is vital in the process. So the types of interviews that you're going to encounter, the MMI, which has become one of the most common now, and it is really designed to try to reduce bias, to enable the interviewers to see the ability of the applicant to think. I'm sorry about that, it jumped, to think on their feet, and it really is probably in our mind's eye, and that's why we do the MI the most fair. There are 8 inputs in our MMI, so even if you don't do well on one particular interview, you still have the ability to rebound. It's not, do or die. And it's that input from 8 different interviewers that determines the interview result. The other piece is only in ours, we have what we call somewhat of a hybrid model. So one of the rooms is open, and the other 7 rooms, the only thing that the interviewer knows about you is your name and your AMCAS ID. They know nothing about what school you went to, what activities you've done, and in a very fair way, there is no bias. The attempt is to remove the bias, which I think the MMI certainly does in many circumstances. You don't have the advantage of necessarily your interest in psychiatry and you're interviewed by a psychiatrist. They have no idea, what your background is. So again, fair across the board to the applicants. We talk about the behavioral interviews. Those basically give you certain types of questions that will essentially predict how you will react in future situations. But even in a behavioral interview, many of the interviewers will have access to your interview record. There are some schools that do panel type interviews. I know Michigan has that in their interview process where you may have more than one interviewer interviewing you at a time. And then there are also these group interviews as well, but those are far less common, the MMI and the behavioral being a little bit more common right now. Now, what MMI used to look like pre-COVID, and you see everybody was by, and we had these rooms with the scenario on the wall, and you would take your notes. But now, given the COVID circumstance, the MMI looks like this on a screen, much like we're doing today. And what is the MMI? I think many of you may be familiar, but it is time stations, again, able to measure specific skills, professionalism, ethical and moral judgment, team approach, resilience, all of that. It was initiated in McMaster University in 2011. And a lot of the schools, and I'm going to put it up, the slide coming up with the list, have adapted it. Some, like ours, do a hybrid model where there is the scenario stations, but there is that open room in there where the applicant is interviewed by somebody that actually has access to the application and is able to ask particular questions as they refer to the applications. Again, the purpose, quantitative, unbiased scoring. Again, the biases are all removed. Nobody knows whether you went to Harvard or Stern. They don't have any of those biases available to them when they talk to you. It tends to be objective and reduces the variability because everybody is asked the same questions. Again, 8 stations, so the fact that one can go badly and you'll still be fine, as opposed to if you were in a behavioral interview and were only interviewed by 2 people. If one goes badly, you're not in such good shape at the end of that, and you can customize it to the mission of the school. And in our MMI, as in many others as well, not only do we use our faculty members, but members of the community. We use members of the PA school, the nursing school, the Hofstra undergrad community. So you're able to branch out and use more of the community where the applicant essentially is going to be training, learning medicine, as well as potentially practicing medicine once they complete medical school. So here are a list of the most current that use the MMI. I draw your attention to us up here, New York Med. Many of you are going to be applying there. Both NYUs, the NYU Long Island, as well as the NYU Langone, Albany Medical College. You can see some heavy hitters. Stanford uses it. Duke uses it. It is being adapted by many, many schools. I talked about Michigan with a hybrid model here as well. All of the California schools, I don't know if any Californians are here, but a lot of the California universities use the MMI as well. So it has become a very popular interviewing technique, again, for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned. So some of the scenarios that you're going to see, and I'm sure if you Google and you'll see there are many resources online that give you what potential scenarios. I Googled one. There were 300 scenarios on there if you want to look, and we have our own specific ones. There are some that are more generalized that a lot of schools use. But you can sort of see the nature of some of them. Some give you a clinical vignette, such as the one on the top, which asks you to, discuss how you may, treat somebody, different skin color issues, or the domestic assault issue of a fellow clinician on the bottom. And some are a little bit more broad, like the one in the middle, a mistake that you made in the past, an impact that it has on other people, and so on and so on. So some, again, are very specific to a clinical vignette, and some tend to be a little bit broader as well. So here's an example you'll see here.
Doctor's primary aim be to change behavior to prevent disease or treat existing disease. What are your thoughts on upstream and downstream care?
Hey, hi, my name is Jabari.
Hi, my name is Emily Nguyen, and it's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. You can go ahead and get started.
The prompt, as I understand it, deals with whether a doctor's primary aim should be to change behavior to prevent disease or treat existing disease, and how I feel about both upstream and downstream care. The initial thought that I had was whether or not I'm a primary care physician or a specialist. I'm going to take the perspective of the primary care physician. Yes, a doctor's primary aim should be to change behavior to prevent disease. However, there are various factors involved with this that will affect the approach of each patient.
Okay. So you mentioned mistreatment and implicit bias in the healthcare system. Can you elaborate on this?
I think that implicit bias is something that can be quickly seen, such as homelessness and obesity.
So again, this is just an ability to sort of see how there is a little bit of discussion. There are going to be follow-up questions in the MMI, and sort of how you go about approaching it. And again, just a little bit of an example of what you can anticipate when you're considering interviewing at a school that uses the MMI. So I know a couple of the things that we were told to discuss. So what you do after the interview. So thank you notes. You can see here a little bit of an outline about thank yous. You should send them relatively soon after the interview, and they should be short, but generally the thought is to include something from the interaction. In other words, not just a generic thank you for interviewing me, I'm so interested in your school, I hope to hear from you soon. But if you can bring something out from that interaction, something you discussed, and especially with regard in the MMI, that open room is the place really, it's hard to sort of, and we understand that, to send a thank you from a 6-minute discussion that you're having about a specific scenario. But in our case, it's that open room where that thank you may be directed towards someone with a little bit more of an interaction, because that open room is longer. Ours is about 16 to 18 minutes, and you have more of a conversation as opposed to just something focused on the scenario. And again, highlight your interest in the school, all of that. And again, now in thank you notes, just acknowledge, that you're basically adhering to the protocol. We actually studied ours, and the students who, some of them did, some of them didn't write them. It didn't necessarily indicate a level of interest in the school. We actually looked at it, but again, if you're going according to protocol, putting something in just shows that you are professional, that you are acknowledging an appreciation that you're part of a competitive process, that you've been granted an interview in a competitive process, and you're basically acknowledging that and appreciating that opportunity to present yourself to the school. A little bit with regard to letters of intent, and these generally take life a little bit later on in the process, especially as you're approaching the wait list. That's where really the letters of intent come to life here. And what should really be included in that letter is that if you are accepted, you will attend. So generally, that's to the school you want to go to, and don't send that to more than one because the medical school community is small. If you have other acceptances, it's helpful. Schools want to know potentially how competitive you are. I've been accepted at X medical school, but I want to come to yours, and you're my first choice, and I'm coming if you take me. And why you want to come, and that's important, and also how you will contribute. Understand that when the wait list is coming, May 1 on the backside, we're as tired as you are. You've been going through the interview process the whole season. We've been interviewing since September. We're trying to finalize our class, and you want to know that the people that you're considering accepting from the wait list want to come to you. So those letters of intent really do have a purpose and are helpful. But again, especially the ones that say, I'm coming if I accepted, that's to the school you are really going to go to if they take you. With regard to virtual interviewing, just some helpful tips. Reliable internet access, really important. Understand that schools know that there are issues with technology. Don't be concerned if something happens. We give applicants an opportunity to repeat a room, to repeat a circuit if they have to, if for some reason, some form of technology interference occurs in the interview. We're well aware of it, but obviously we tell our interviewers very similar to how we tell our interviewees, try to be at a place where you know that the internet access, your Wi-Fi access, is going to be good and strong. The webcam and microphone, make sure you're fully charged, make sure you're near a power source, all these things that make sense. But it's important also to familiarize yourself with your school's interview platform and try and shut everything else down just to minimize the interference. Be at a private space, well lit, all these things sort of are common sense. But important, you should dress professionally, even though it's a virtual interview. Whatever, wear your suit, wear at least your blazer and your blouse, or whatever. We still are looking for professionalism in the process, and it's important. And that also is regard to where you're sitting. I recommend blur the background. You don't want to call attention to things that if you're in a dorm room and your bed is there, it's just helpful if you can on Zoom just to put the blur out. And that way the interviewer is focused on you and nothing else. So, or if you have a banner of some form, whatever it is, just try to negate the background as best as you can. And make sure you're familiar with your application, especially in schools that don't do an MMI or may do a hybrid MMI. You want to know that you can answer about things that you've actually put in your application process, and know something about the school that you're interviewing at. I know we at ZSOM, we send out a curricular video to those who we invite. We send out student affairs info. We send out a lot of stuff in advance so that the interview day is not bogged down with all kinds of presentations. Look at that stuff. I'm sure other schools send you things in advance or not. If they don't, go on their website. Make sure you know what's going on there. It shows a level of interest. It will do you well. the school wants to know that, you're interviewing at them, not just because they're in New York and you want to stay in New York. That's not a good answer. You want to stay at a particular institution because you're interested in X or Y or Z, and that school has a particular program, an X or Y or Z, and you should talk about that program, not just I went to college in New York, I want to stay in New York, my family is in New York. That's helpful at times, but you should know something about the school that you're looking at. With regard to the virtual process, so there are a lot of pros to it. We discussed a little bit prior to you guys coming on some of the negatives, but obviously we can look at a broader range of applicants from all different parts of the country. It makes it more competitive in some ways. Obviously, it's accessible. Logging on is a lot easier than flying across the country to various schools. You just have to log on, makes it easier, which allows you to save time and save money. And that's both ends, on both the interviewers as well as the interviewees. And that's why this virtual process, I think, has really taken on a lot of importance and a lot of emphasis because of both the interviewee and the interviewer benefiting from time and money saving processes. Again, some people talk about the reduction in the environmental impact, a little bit of being able to be flexible in the scheduling. Now, what are the negatives? Obviously, the lack of in-person connection. You don't get to see the institution, and that is the last thing there. Do you get a chance to get a feel for the school? What's it like? What's it about? Excuse me, what's the student body about? And obviously, we occasionally have the technical breakdowns, the Zoom fatigue, etc. But you can see that the pros, for the most part, at least at this point in time, outweigh the cons. And that's why I think more and more pretty much everybody is doing the virtual. I know we at ZSOM, we have in-person visits after acceptance. So we try to get over that issue of the student who is accepted not necessarily getting the right feel for the school from all the information that we share by allowing them to come and visit. But our decision is to do it post-acceptance as opposed to in the interview process up front, at least as it stands now.
So I'm going to jump on and add a little bit to what Dr. Waldenberg said, and then we'll have hopefully a chance for people to ask questions. So just in full disclosure, I am not involved in medical school applications and admissions and never have been. So my experience with med school interviewing was back in 2001 when I was applying for med school. Zoom did not exist. The internet was pretty much a cardboard box and a fax machine. Not really, but it felt like it sometimes. And MMI was not even on the horizon. So I'm instead going to focus on general interview tips and then some specifics for Zoom interviewing, because I do a lot of interviewing for residency, which has been all on Zoom since 2020, since COVID. So really, I'm going to give one piece of general advice for interviews and then open it up for questions. And that is a piece of advice that I was given when I applied to when I was applying for residency, and has held at different points when I was applying for residencies, for fellowship, for jobs, etc. And that piece of advice is think of 3 things that you want to get across about yourself, 3 things that differentiate you from the crowd, and find a way to make sure that you get those 3 things across and work them into whatever question you're asked. So for example, your 3 things might be, you're really interested in global health, you have a strong commitment to public health research, and you want to stay in the Northeast. Let's say those are, and of course those don't have to be your 3 things, but even if no one asks you, well, what area are you interested geographically? Or are you interested in any kind of research? If those are your 3 things that you want to get across and you feel that make you different from other applicants, find a way to work it in. So if someone asks, for example, where do you see yourself in 5 years? You could say, well, I'd like to stay in the Northeast, but at the same time, I'm really interested in global health, and I hope that I can work in public health research. And of course, this is very artificial. You don't have to cram them all into one answer, but find a way to fit your 3 things into the questions that you're being asked. So that's my just overall perspective on interviews. Because when we see applications, everyone has great grades, everyone did well in their MCATs, everyone has similar volunteering opportunities and research opportunities that they listed. So if there's something that you can do to differentiate yourself and make the interviewer remember you afterwards, that will work in your favor. Okay, so that's general interviews, and I apologize that I don't have slides. Now I want to focus on Zoom interviews specifically, and I have actually purposely did some things that I recommend you don't do so that you can see how it looks when someone is not following the rules. So number one, like Dr. Waldenberg said, if at all possible, keep a plain background because you want the focus to be on you, not on, hey, why does she have empty shelves on her bookcase? That's kind of weird. And what books are those on her bookshelf? You don't want the interviewer thinking about those things. You want them focusing on you. TMI, I have empty shelves because we are packing up to move. So half my bookcases are empty, but you don't want anyone thinking about that. You want them thinking about you. So if you could get a plain wall to sit in front, that's best. If you can't, then, or even if you can, as Dr. Waldenberg said, blurring the background is completely acceptable and will keep the focus on you and your face. When you're sitting in front of the camera, ideally it should not be on a phone. It should be either on a tablet or on a computer. And that's so that you have a big screen, you're not sort of squinting and trying to see their face. It's really best if you have either a large tablet or on a computer screen. Now, one tip that also I learned later on in the process, whenever you are facing a screen, your camera is never going to be right where your eyes are, right? So if you're on a phone or an iPad, your camera's at the top and the screen is at the bottom. Or for me, I'm on my computer, so my camera is here. I'm looking at it now and the screen is right below it. Do your best to look at the camera and not at the screen. And that's especially hard if your setup is where the picture of you is kind of in the lower corner, you know, like it often is on Zoom, because we all have a tendency to look at ourselves and make sure our hair isn't weird, there's nothing in our teeth, but then it looks like you're not making eye contact with the interviewer. So this is what it looks like when I'm looking at the camera, and this is what it looks like when I'm looking at the screen. And you can see the difference, right? So it feels weird, but try to look at the camera and not at the screen as much as possible. That's number two.
I will say that, Devorah, I will say that all the women here who have their videos on, all your backgrounds are perfect. They all are very white, nondescript. So I think they're all, just to comment on those who have allowed us to actually see them, they all look very good. So
yeah,
even
good
if you
job.
good job.
This is actually, I'm glad that you commented that because I do recommend doing a practice interview with someone who you like and you trust, either a mentor or a friend who's also applying, and record it. Because sometimes when you play it back, you realize you have verbal tics, for example, that you didn't realize. Some people say a lot or like, or well, actually, or I have a friend who says fundamentally. Whenever she's anxious, she sticks in the word fundamentally. And I know that when she's nervous, because like when she's giving presentations and she starts saying, well, fundamentally, and she never realized that. So interview yourself, have your friend or your mentor actually do some practice questions. It should be at least 10 minutes or so, and then watch it back. So number one, you see what your background looks like, you see what your lighting looks like, and you see if you have any weird tips or habits that you might want to try to break before the interview. If you have a ring light, that can be very helpful. It just makes the lighting uniform so you don't have any glare. Along those same lines, if you wear glasses, if you wear contact lenses and you can do either way, it's better to wear your contact lenses so there's no glare off the lenses. So you see, depending on where my face is, there's some glare off the lenses. If you only wear glasses, that's fine, but try to make sure that your light is situated so there's not glare off the lenses and they can see your face. Another point is don't use the I'm in a swivel chair. If at all possible, don't use a chair that swivels and don't use a chair on wheels. Use a chair that has 4 legs that stay put, because when we're anxious, we have a tendency to fidget, many of us, and then that doesn't look good on interviews. So try to make sure that you're in a seat that you can't actually move. And then just to echo what Dr. Waldenberg said, be in a quiet place where no one's going to disturb you. Turn off notifications on your computer. If you get a ding every time you get an email, for example, either shut down your email or turn off the notifications, just so that there's no disruptions and distractions in the interview. What else? Oh, clothing. So yes, dress professionally, and if at all possible, wear solid colors. So this shirt, It's very comfortable. I've been wearing it all day, but the pattern, the line, I was going to change before this webinar, and I said, you know what, I'm going to keep it on. So you see, the pattern can be a little bit disorienting and can actually give some people vertigo. So try not to wear a very patterned item of clothing. Wear something solid colored so that, again, it doesn't distract from you. Those are my I think those are my Zoom interview tips, just from my experience on both sides of it. And really, I can't emphasize enough to do a practice interview and record it and watch it over. Either voice record it or video record the whole thing, because you'd be surprised at what will jump out at you when you're actually seeing yourself from the other side.
And I do want to add that I think a lot of applicants are intimidated by the MMI, and they're worried, it's concerning to be, it actually, and we actually wrote a paper on it in academic medicine, that it actually favors the applicant. You will do better in an MMI, believe it or not, than you will in the traditional interview. We saw that more students were eligible to go to the voting committee as a result of engaging in an MMI than they would in the traditional interview. And we did a whole study on this. So I know it sounds a little daunting to be devoid of all those things you've defined yourself with over the past couple of years, your school, your major, your scores, your GPA, your research, all of it, whatever you're doing. But believe it or not, it is to your advantage. And students have a better performance generally on an MMI, and again, with more potential movement through the process as opposed to just two traditional interviews, which a lot of schools do. So don't be afraid. That's all I can tell you. You can do it. The first one sometimes may be a little bit disconcerting, but everybody's in the same boat when it comes to that. And, just, speak from your heart, say what you think. I sort of look at the MMI scenarios as sort of what freshman English was when I went to college. 10% of the people placed out. They were exceptional. They could write, and they were going to be Pulitzer Prize winners. Just 10% of the people needed remedial writing, and they had to go into, and the rest of the 80%, myself included, took some sort of literature-based writing course. And that's sort of how the MMI, like 10% out of the box thinkers, they can, they're going to change the world. 10% are horrible, and the other 80% sort of fall somewhere in between. And trust me, I'm hoping that you're in that 10% out of the box thinkers, but for the most part, you're probably going to be in that range of everybody else. So there's really no right or wrong here, and just don't be intimidated by it. Familiarize yourself with it, but don't be intimidated by it. That's what I'll say. The last thing I like to hear is students, oh, I'm not going to apply to that school because they have an MMI, or I'm not going to interview at that school, because you see a lot of the ones in the New York area, are doing the MMI, and it's important that you're familiar enough with it that you can go in there and you're going to be just fine.
It sounds really scary to me, the MMI, but I'm glad to hear that it's better for students.
I didn't have an MMI either, so, but I heard about it, and that it did scare me, but
It works to your advantage.
yeah.
Promise.
know.
And you can look us up in academic medicine. Google. It's there. It's there. We looked at it. It's definitely to the student's advantage, the applicant's advantage.
Does anyone have any questions before we move on to some just
I see Daphne
other
raised her
general
hand.
questions?
You want to talk, Daphne? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for running this. but I was wondering what would be an appropriate length approximately for an answer in an MMI station? Like, should you try to take up as much of the time or like have more dialogue?
So with regard to that, it depends on the school. Some will want there to be follow-up questions. And we have follow-up questions. So, some schools, will let you talk on and on and on, and some will say, game over. So what I would do is try to get your point across within, it's usually a 2-minute read and then you have 6 minutes. So I would try to get your point across within the first 3 or so and sort of see where the interviewer is taking it. They may tell you, what their structure of their MMI is going to be. I think, it seems to be trending a little bit more toward the possibility of there being follow-up questions in there. So as I said, try and get your point across within the first couple of minutes, and hopefully, where it should, the interviewer will guide you.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes, Atara.
Hi, thank you. In terms of the MMI also, is it appropriate to discuss experiences that we've had as we answer our questions, or should we be speaking strictly in a theoretical sense?
Okay, so probably the best answer, it depends on the prompt, obviously. Some of them are very clinically focused, as I mentioned. If you had an experience similar to the prompt, that you can bring in, being able to connect to yourself or some experience that you've had is obviously helpful. I won't just bring it in out of nowhere, you know what I mean? Because then it's like, oh, I'm trying to get my talking points across. But if you can somehow make a parallel to an experience that you've had, is always helpful, if you can tie that in, if you did some work in a specific area, because some of them, I call them softballs, but they're general, like a mistake, those are, so having, a specific example of that is obviously very relevant. If you're talking about, God forbid, a physician, with a domestic abuse issue that, hopefully you have, you don't, but you may have, there may be something that, happened that you can bring in. And that's always helpful to sort of make a connection to your own, your own experiences. Definitely works.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Leah, do you go by Leah? Leah, where are you?
Mine's good. Hi, thank you so much. I was wondering how the MMI differs from the Casper exam.
Okay, so, well, they're a little different. Casper now, if I'm not mistaken, there are some that are vocal prompts and some that are typed in prompts, right? We use both actually, which is interesting. We ask for Casper, and we ask for the MMI. Generally, there may be a little bit of overlap, but obviously ours are all verbal responses. That's the first thing. They tend to be, or ours can be a little bit, schools, MMIs can be a little bit more mission specific as to what they're looking for, as opposed to the Casper, which is a little bit more generalized in what they're asking. There are a lot of similar concepts going on there, but Casper allows you to sort of respond in various ways, written as well, typed responses as well as verbal responses. We're obviously just a communicative kind of thing, and there is an interaction in there with the MMI, so it does sort of evaluate your ability to have a communication with somebody as sort of a one-way transfer of information.
Okay, thank you so much.
There's also, the preview. Have any of you taken the preview yet? The AMCAS preview exam? You have, Sarah? So that's a Sarah or Sarah?
Sarah, yeah.
Sarah. So that's more, that's sort of online with a multiple choice type of test. Some schools ask for previews, some schools ask for Casper. there are differing philosophies on that. The school's out a little bit as to what works better. We like the open communication style better. It works with our pedagogy in our school, where we don't do multiple choice tests as an assessment. We do give our students multiple choice questions just to make sure they're keeping pace for the USMLE exams, but we actually have free form exams where short answer, you're generating the information. So the Casper actually works more in line with what we're about, right? As opposed to the preview, which is, again, if you're good, generally the MCAT, those who do well on the MCAT do well on the preview. It's sort of that incorporates that sort of test taking ability in there, which I'm not a big fan of. I think that, if we're looking for a situational judgment test, it shouldn't be those who can take a standardized test better to allow them to do better on the test, right? You want to know if somebody has an ability to communicate and, assess a specific circumstance. And we want to know what you're thinking, not what we want you to be thinking, if that makes sense to you. Oh, Sarah, please.
Sorry, this is sort of a general question, but in your experience, I know you mentioned that bottom 10% and that top 10%. Is there anything sort of definable that you find puts people in that bottom 10% or that top 10%? Is it a professionalism? Is it preparedness?
So what I would say in general, and Devora, you can help here with your opinion. I would love to hear yours. Always look at the patient perspective. So whatever question you're asked, okay, I would always consider it through the lens of the patient, okay? And I think that that's a helpful hint, okay, in terms of answering a lot of these questions, because, you can say, well, this is the right thing to do and X, Y, and Z, but if the patient is unfamiliar, is uneducated, is from a different culture, that may not be the right answer. So especially in these scenario based where there's a patient interaction or a patient something or other, like let's say, they'll give you a scenario about, patient coming into the emergency room and they're they're complaining of this and they're demanding this test, right? That they looked up on the internet for some crazy disease, the answer should be, well, the patient's crazy and there's no way that this is what it is. And I've seen 1,000 cases of the same thing. And this is not, you have to sort of express an understanding of the patient. So that's a generalized rule, I think, to a lot of these scenario-based type questions. The other thing is, again, respect for authority, which is always important. Understand that medicine has a hierarchy and an authority situation going on there. So you have to be respectful, but at the same time, you want to also acknowledge that, clinicians can be wrong, we can be jaded, we can be burnt out, we can have all of those aspects. So if there's something that you feel is not going right in a care circumstance, there's a way of expressing that in a respectful manner. So I think that's important. So patient perspective, respect for the authority, but on the other hand, understanding that there are times where that authority structure may need to be challenged. And the other thing, team. It's all about the team. Medicine is about the team, incorporating members of the team, being respectful of the team. You want to come across, I think, Devora, you probably can speak to it on the GME end. The best residents aren't necessarily the smartest residents. The best residents are the team players. They're the ones who come early, who are helpful, who help colleagues, who aren't clocking, looking at the clock, checking in, what time out. You want to be, you want to present yourself as someone who is a team player. And even, and you know, I don't know what you guys have been coached about the Shabbos thing. You got to be a little careful there. I think you have to, you know, whatever your individual feelings are about it. I'm honest, I don't know. And Devorah, I'm curious again what you think, whether you should bring it up or not. I don't know if I would, you know, and those are things that can be dealt, you know, in the medical school, it's not as big a deal because predominantly it's cultural and it's accepted. I know in our school, it's almost easier for kids who are Shomer Shabbos because we're not like, not everybody is, you know, it's not like a huge pop, you know, and so because of that, it's easier, you know, because it may just be, but I would be a little careful about that. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'm passing it over to Devorah, you want to show you're resilient if you have had some challenges, but the adage is healed scars, not open wounds. Okay. And take that with you. Okay. If you got some stuff going on that's still going on, whatever it may be, don't necessarily put it out there if you haven't come to some resolution and have moved forward. Understand you're in a process where there are 5,000 applicants to a class of 100 students. That's what we are, right? Healed scars. You've gone through something, God forbid, an illness, a family illness, your own personal challenges, but you have gotten past, you have incorporated into your life. It's all good, not the open wounds. I'm gay. I haven't told my family yet. You know, it's, you know, I'm from a very traditional background. Being gay is not accepted. That piece you don't need, you know, I'm just being honest that I want you to be successful. So just whenever you're thinking about sharing a vulnerability, it's one that you can demonstrate resilience, that the resilience piece is there. Okay, Devorah,
Yeah, there's so much there, so much to unpack, and just really a lot of pearls of wisdom. So I was going to take the question, how do you make sure you're in the top 10%, not the bottom, to interviewees in general, because like I said, I don't have experience with the MMI, but there's so much that Rona said that is really applicable. Number one, what stands out to me, there are a few characteristics that really stand out to me about interviewees and makes me remember them positively. Come in confident and comfortable, but also respectful. You have made it to the interview, which means that you made it through the first cut and the school is interested in you. If you weren't someone that they were interested in, you would not have gotten an interview. So come in with the confidence to you, knowing that you're valuable and that you could be valuable to the school, but at the same time with respect that, with an understanding that it's still a very competitive process, and with a respect for your interviewees who have gone through so much more than you haven't gone through. Just another kind of Zoom tip, I recommend that even if you're on Zoom, that you wear your bottom half like you were going to an in-person interview, including shoes, because that just makes you sit differently. It makes you hold yourself differently. It makes you more professional and formal, and those things come across. And then I really look for, and again, this is interviewing in a residency situation, but I think a lot holds for medical school too. I agree, the patient perspective. I'm a pediatric neurologist with a specialty in neuro-oncology. So I meet people at their lowest, the families at their most frightened. And what often comes across as the crazy patient or, oh, they're impossible, is just fear. It's a parent's fear that their child has just been diagnosed with a brain tumor, or that we're not sure what the next treatment option is going to be. And when you try to put yourself in their perspective, number one, it helps with your empathy. And number two, it really helps interactions. I mean, I've been able to diffuse really escalating intense interactions between team members and family members or patients just by coming in and saying, this must be so terrifying for you. I can't even imagine. Let's talk about what your fears are and how we can address it. You know, and it could be someone coming like, I don't know, one of these MMIs, a patient wants to go to Ecuador for an experimental treatment and is refusing chemotherapy. How do you address that? I mean, that sounds like an MRI I would write if I was in charge of this. So really, the right answer is that's crazy. They're going to die. They need traditional chemotherapy or radiation or what have you. But that's not going to get you anywhere on your interview, and it's not going to get you anywhere in your career. So the real answer is, well, tell me your thoughts. what are you hoping to gain from this? What are your fears about the medication and the treatment regimen that I recommended? So I think that's a great tip, seeing it from the patient perspective, and then putting your medical piece as a sidebar, or trying to mesh those two together. And then the team player, being a team player is such a key piece of what we're looking for. Of course, we want people who are academically talented, who are interested in research. I'm Pete's neuro, so it's a very cerebral, no pun intended, field. But really what it comes down to is, do I think I want to spend 5 years with you? You know, or in the med school scenario, 4 years with you? Are you going to be someone who's there for your friends, who supports your classmates, who is someone that a peer leader, and that's going to translate into the residency sphere and to the rest of your career. So showing that you care about the other people on the team, that you're thinking about their perspectives, is really important. And for sure that can be built into the MMI, or to whatever kind of interview scenario. Behavioral interviewing also, it can be very much built into that. In terms of the Shabbos, I think it's really not an issue for med school, honestly, because it's very rare. Certainly in the first 2 years, you almost never have anything on a weekend. And if you do, you can switch out pretty easily. The clinical years, you know, the dirty little secret is, as a med student, I mean, as important as you are, and we tell you that you're important, you're kind of dispensable. I hate to say that. No one heard that from me. But there's very, very rarely a reason why you'd have to go in a way that conflicts with your personal values or with something that's important to you. You can almost always work around it. It's a very different scenario in residency, and that's a whole different kettle of fish that we're not going to get into. But being a team player is, even as a med student, is a big, big piece. You don't want to be the one who's seen as always leaving early, always leaving work for their classmates to do. So if, for example, you do get permission to be out for a holiday or to leave early on a Friday, you want to make sure you really make it up on the other days, like offer to take another patient or to help out your classmates with their write-ups or whatever it is, so that you're doing your part and being that team player. And then to the last piece, I love that phrase, healed scars, not open wounds. So one question that we were given in advance, and that I'm often asked, is how do you respond if someone says, what's your greatest weakness? Back in the day, decades ago, they used to say, turn your weakness into strength. Like, well, sometimes I just care too much, or I have a tendency to work too hard. I just get so lost in the case, and sometimes I work too hard. That's complete BS. Everyone sees right through that, and it's not actually a good thing. A much better approach is to choose a true weakness, but something that you've worked on and grown through and solved. And even if you're not completely solved, that you have gained from. So for example, a weakness could be, sometimes I have trouble with time management, and that has in the past affected my studying, but I've worked really hard. I worked with an executive skills coach. I took classes, and now I have all kinds of techniques to help me manage my time. And you can see that I succeeded because my grades improved, or I was able to, my last 2 years of college, I was able to fit in much more effective extracurriculars and research because I became better at managing my time, something like that, where it's something that's legitimate and real, but something that you can show growth and show that you now have a healed scar and not an open wound there.
And always spin, don't play defense. If you got a bad grade in something, I always say you finished, right? Like we're not perfect. You're going to make mistakes, man. I give the example, I don't know if any of you have heard me speak before, but there was a student who had straight A's on the transcript and had a withdrawal in orgo. And you could just tell what happened there. That student took a midterm, got probably a grade that she was not comfortable, that she was going to be able to bounce out of to get back to the A range. And she withdrew from that course. And I was like, we don't want that person. If you expect yourself to be perfect, then this is not the right career for you. I'm telling you flat out, Devorah, you could probably, I'm a radiologist, trust me, and our mistakes are right there. they're full force, so we can't hide from them. Trust me, the lawyers, well, they'll point them out to you. But you can't, perfection is not an option here. It's not going to happen. So, if you struggled in a course, a lot of times, like, and that's why I tell applicants never talk about your grades. If somebody brings them up to you, it's fine, but don't volunteer them, right? They're looking at thousands of applicants. You got a B in something. B is fine. Trust me. If you got a C in something, it was your freshman year and you bounced from there, it's fine. We're not, nobody's expecting perfection. We want to know that you're smart enough, and after that it's everything else that matters, and that's where all of the things that come from. That's why I showed you that box, of 17% of people who are really, by all of the quantitative criteria, are really smart, but they can't talk to people. They just can't, and that's why they don't get in, or they did something horrendous, in that took them out. So I would always, if somebody brings it up to you and you are having a challenge, spin it positive. Look, it was going through a difficult time. It was COVID, but I finished. I did it. I didn't quit, and there's a lot to be said for that, of not just, of not expecting the perfection, but of completing, finishing, and getting it done.
Yeah.
I think Devora will echo, we're not expecting perfection.
Yeah.
And we don't want perfection, because if you're expecting perfection, you're not gonna you're not gonna be a good
No,
doctor.
I agree.
Not
And
gonna
someone
happen.
who's, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. No, I agree. Someone who's never faced any kind of adversity, we're concerned. What's going to happen the first time a patient's outcome doesn't go the way you wanted? What's going to happen the first time a test was harder than you expected? And it will happen. I guarantee it. You're going to join a class in medical school where everyone's been the top of their class through college. Everyone's used to being the smartest in the room. And there's a bell curve. Not everyone gets A's. Not everyone does great the first time around, and that's okay. And we want to see people who face adversity and bounce back and showed that they're resilient. I agree. And the other thing is that we want people who are whole individuals. They're not just medicine. Some schools focus on that more than others. I went to Mount Sinai. Zucker actually was not around then. It started, I think, shortly after. Mount Sinai has been particularly interested in people who are well-rounded individuals, and I know a lot of other schools feel that way as well. And we've recognized that in order to really succeed as a physician and as a doctor and as a resident, you have to have other things in your life and not just medicine. And we want to see that there are other things that are important to you and that you found a way to integrate that. Of course, we want people who are dedicated to medicine, but it can't be the only thing that you are. So if there's something that you're really good at or that you really love to do and there's a way to bring that in, I would encourage that. I'm not sure how that works with the MMI, but certainly with more general questions, you could bring in your love of music and how that influences how you see patients, or I don't know, origami and visual spatial skills, and why you think that you'd be a great, again, thinking more residency, a great radiologist because you're good at 3D visualizations. But if there's something that gives us a sense of who you are as a person and tells us that you're not just an MCAT score and a GPA, I think that works to your advantage.
Esther, if it's okay, there are a couple of questions here in the chat I'll answer quickly here. So classic questions to prepare for general or MMI, Google that. You can find a gazillion scenarios. Just go to Google MMI scenarios, and you will find, more than you could ever imagine. And I would, the same thing for behavioral interview questions. So there's tons of stuff on, that you can find that are available on the internet. With regard to the MMI, I think when I put it up, a lot of schools, ours, Michigan, do hybrid. So there is one room where the person, I think I mentioned that earlier, has access to the application. The rest of them are some form of a scenario. So those 7 other rooms don't have any of your personal information, but one of them does. So we call that a hybrid model. It depends on the school, but that's how we roll ours. And as some of schools do a similar thing because they want to have an opportunity to sort of ask you some questions if there's something in the application that they may feel problematic. The other question, any correlation between SJT and MMI? And that's very interesting. And we looked at that, and there isn't that much. You'd be surprised. People think that, and that's the point. Like, why would we do the SJT and the MMI? And we have found that we're getting different information from the SJT and the MMI, where we've submitted that paper to be published as well. We're looking at all of this. There's a science behind all this stuff. It's not just to make you nuts and to torture you with all of these different things. But the correlations are not that strong. And there is different information that comes from both of those things. We're actually asking, and full disclosure for those of you who have applied to us, we do require Casper. We're asking students who took the preview to share with us their scores, just to see, we're looking at the correlation, how those two overlap, the preview versus the Casper, and to see, how those line up, one being a multiple choice test, one being a free form test. So, everybody's trying to look at, what is the best way to evaluate some of those sort of communicate the professionalism skills, the communication skills, as opposed to just the straight up quantitative GPA, MCAT, those kind of things.
Any other last questions that we didn't address?
Okay, just you can Google my name because we actually have an AI model that we use to screen, and that's out in full view as well. So we use AI to screen applications. NYU does too. There are a bunch of us who they're published in academic medicine. We are as well. And we also, the other paper about the traditional interview versus, so there, just put my name in and you should be able to find the articles. Okay. As well. All right. But understand, you guys are, if for some reason and you don't get in the first time, you can apply again. Many students do. Try to figure out, we do offer some conversation to students who have applied to us and who didn't get in. If you reach out after the cycle closes to give some recommendations, sometimes it's easy. You just, you need to retake your MCAT. You should have taken it again. It's competitive. You're in New York. It's a competitive place. You want to get in New York and you only applied in New York. Sometimes you have to broaden it out. Sometimes it's, look, you got the numbers, but you just coming out of college. You don't have necessarily experience other students have. Maybe do a little bit research, maybe do a little bit more community service, get yourself out of the box, interact with marginalized communities, medicine. And again, Devor, I think will echo, medicine is a liberal environment. They are liberal. It is about social determinants of health. It is about vulnerable communities. It's all of that. So, they want to know that you can go beyond your own space and be able to interact and show empathy, as Devora mentioned, and be able to work with people who come from very different spaces than your own. And sometimes it's as simple as that, just going into a different space. We see a lot of kids, and I just bring the yeshiva, the HASC, and a lot of them do the same things. They want to know that you can step out of there, and work in a soup kitchen and work with Hispanic population, or maybe learn Spanish or try to learn medical Spanish. That's the world. And unless you're going, it's anywhere you go to medical school, you have to be able to function in those environments.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one thing that can be a disadvantage from someone who's up in a typical yeshiva or Beis Yaakov community. More so, I think the boys who've gone through the regular yeshiva system, a little bit less so the girls in the Beis Yaakov system, but it can be a disadvantage if you've just never been exposed to any other environment other than the one in which you were raised. And interviewers know that. In the New York world, especially, I think out of New York, there's probably just less awareness, but in the New York environment, everybody's aware of that, and that they might be more attuned to how you show that you can step out of that, because people will look at your resume and see you went to Beis Yaakov this and that seminary and Stern, and wonder if you actually can look at scenarios from a perspective other than your own. So I think it's even more important to prove that you can than for an applicant with a different demographic. I agree.
Step out of the box.
Yeah.
Get yourself out of the box. I tell it to the YU guys, the same thing. You got to get yourself, try your best, you know, to get out of the box. Because at
Yeah.
some point, you're going to have to, whether it's during med school, certainly, if not your residency, you know, you're going to have to get out of there, in the sense of being able to, you know, work in an environment with people who are different from you, different backgrounds, maybe prejudiced, maybe anti-Semitic, have all of those things. You know, you have to sort of be able to navigate that if you're going to be a successful physician. And I just want to leave you with one thing that I thought was very interesting, Devorah. And so the three schools, right? Columbia, Penn, and Cornell, all of their acting presidents right now, right? I'm sure some of you were paying attention in the news, and all those presidents got jettisoned. They were replaced by doctors. Larry Jameson is the dean of the medical school at Penn. He is now the acting president at University of Pennsylvania. Alan Garber, Cornell. Armstrong, I don't remember her first name, is a reproductive endocrinologist at Columbia. And it's because physicians are apolitical. We're supposed to be, right? We treat everybody, right? We're supposed to be respectful of everybody. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they put in doctors, in all MDs. They're all MDs, right? And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because that's what the background that we come from. We have to be understanding, tolerant, accepting, and unbiased. And, you know, in the climate that a lot of colleges, universities, the kids are going through right now, and we're all sensitive to that, you know, who better than to put a doctor up there and say, hey, time out. You know, we're all, you know, we're all human. And, you know, you have to, you know, and I think sort of echoing that, you know, you have to show that you have an understanding that medicine encompasses everybody.
And with that, good luck, everyone.
All right, you know what? I'm going to put, I wanted to put my email in the cycle here, but let me do that so that if any of you have a particular question, where is to everyone?
I put mine up there also.
Oh, Devorah, you're there. So why I'm trying to here. Let's see if I can get in there. Am I okay to everyone? I hope I'm not answering to you only. I don't know why, but here. Let's see. All right, and feel free. Let's see. How did we do with that? Let's see. I may be a little funky. I'm hoping it went to everybody. That was my only question. But let's, oh my goodness. Did I get, it's not meant to, did it go? But it didn't.
Yes, I see it.
But it should be Rona.Wolfberg, not that greater than sign. It got in there. I don't know how that happened.
Does everyone see it or just me?
Did it go straight to
I'll copy it to everyone.
I don't know why I'm like
Yeah,
stuck in
it
there.
Oh, did. Okay, great.
Okay, but no greater than sign. I'm not greater than. I'm same as.
Oh, you are.
I am same as. Here we go. There you go. Okay, that's no. It should be Rona.Wolfberg.
Yeah.
Okay, it's late. It's okay. I'm doing it again. Hold on, I'll get it right. Okay, no problem. All right, at Hofstra.edu. Yes, that is it. Beautiful. Okay.
Got it.
All right.
All right. Best of luck, everyone.
Okay, Devorah, it was great talking with you.
Yes, same.
All good.
I look forward to crossing paths.
God willing, it should be women, go for it, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, you're our future. We're looking to you, okay? You got to take over for us. Me especially, I'm way old, so it's all good. All right.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.